And before we begin, I'm going to do a little brief introduction as to who I am. I am Jess Neary of Jess Neary Designs. I am an interior designer and feng shui designer, helping personal and professional clients design spaces that feel really good to themselves. Speaking of offices and businesses, I'm also helping design spaces that are going to feel good for their clients, the employees, and coworkers as well. So creating a space with lots of intention and having a clear direction on where we're going to go with this space. So tonight we're going to talk about clutter pretty briefly. So it should be a really fun video to watch and rewatch as you pop in and out perhaps. Hi everyone that's joining live. Hi Steph. If you have any questions as I'm going along, if you have any insights yourself, if you have any examples of what I'm talking about, feel free to place them right here in the comment section and I'll read them as I go. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. So we're talking about clutter, and clutter is a really important conversation to have because oftentimes we have spaces in our home or our office that seem to collect clutter, collect items that are not really serving any sort of purpose rather than just sitting there in the space. And there's a couple different ways we can look at clutter. Of course, we can keep in mind the fact that best way to declutter with 3 kids. Hey, I'm with you. I've got 3 children myself, and decluttering is really an ongoing process. And so we've got some tips for that as well. But clutter can be looked at in a couple different ways. Of course, we can think of it in the sense of, having a clear space equals a clear mind, which sort of alludes to the fact that clutter is creating limitations, obstacles, barriers, or blocks in our physical space. And I agree with that. I also look at clutter personally from a perspective that it holds a lot of opportunity and potential for creating a really great space. However, sometimes we just need that little extra guidance or insight or recommendations or suggestions to really see its potential. Okay, so with that, what is clutter? There's a whole host of different definitions that you can find online that really define what clutter is. Essentially, it is, or they are, or it is items that are no longer serving you. And that's a pretty broad way of defining what clutter actually is. However, this is where we have that opportunity to bring in our discernment. And with discernment, we can clearly identify what is and what is not clutter. Now, with design consultation with myself, and more specifically with a feng shui design consultation, we first start at setting an intention for the space that we are working in. Oftentimes, we're also looking at the entire home or an entire office space as well. And when we have this very clear intention for the space, I've noticed that, and clients have noticed that, it is much more obvious to become aware of clutter that is in your space. Oftentimes, certainly if we're in our own home, we're walking room to room, it's a space that perhaps we've been in fairly frequently or fairly regularly, it can be really easy to sort of have blinders as to what the clutter is. Sometimes it's very obvious, but then it just sits there and it just sort of lingers and waits for it to move on its own. But setting that intention is a very strong place to begin. To identify perhaps what is and what is not clutter. Ideally, in the way that I look at judging whether it is an item is clutter or not, because perhaps it's just not in its rightful home, it's not being used to its potential. Oftentimes, clutter in one room of your home can be extremely valuable to another area of your home. So in that sense, it's not necessarily clutter that needs to leave entirely. It just is in its wrong spot, or less opportune placement. Essentially, we can also look at this in the sense of when you're picking up this item, does it spark joy? If you're familiar with Marie Kondo's method of decluttering. Essentially, we're going to look at it though and have this honest look and bring our awareness to these items, and again, bring our discernment, of course, and identify whether it is something that is going to serve you in the future or if it's serving you currently. If it's not, if it's something that's been hanging around for a little while, then it could be the perfect time to clear it out, donate. If it's broken, if it's something that's worn out, it could be trash, it could be garbage, it could be something that perhaps is repurposed. Maybe it's something that you've had the intention to repurpose. However, it's been a couple years and there it just sits. It's a great time. It's a very potent time when we're going through our space to really identify what is clutter with our discernment and by bringing our awareness to our space. Of course, when we bring our awareness to our space, immediately things begin to shift automatically. And that's because we're starting to already develop creative solutions on clearing and shifting the clutter itself. It's kind of easier said than done, perhaps. However, when you have this practice in your own home, then you're able to really start to notice that shift that already begins to occur. I'm sure, no doubt, if you're watching this right now, you can think of different areas in your home where clutter is very obvious, and that's always a really great place to begin. And when we bring our attention, our awareness there, immediately we start to begin creating sort of the next actionable steps on having it removed from the space. Now, I would love to purge my whole home, but find it difficult since we can only have so much garbage for 2 weeks. Oh, interesting. Have requests for a dumpster for my birthday. Oh, I love that. Well, and I hear you on this as well, because we have somewhat of a cap in our home as well. Although, what has been incredibly beneficial for us, if it is something in respect to garbage, for example, and I do know you have a truck, there is a dump that is not too far, and I'm saying this because I know this particular individual is from my local community here in New Brunswick, Canada, in Hampton, New Brunswick, Canada, more specifically. But you can certainly create like a little area where it will accumulate the items that you're planning to completely remove from your home. And in that sense, and there's a few different ways, there used to be a local pickup as well. And there are individuals and services, local services around that you can hire to come and actually pick it up for you as well. So that would be something on top of the normal garbage run as well. But there's certainly different options available for you if that is kind of the limiting factor on purging your whole home. However, also, it doesn't have to be like an all or nothing type of practice or exercise. It can really be a beautiful way to go through your space room by room, or you could do, an hour a week. It doesn't have to be anything so significant as well. And I find that's a really more like a sustainable way of clearing clutter from your space as well. And by doing that, you're actually creating that habit also of circulating the items in your space. Of course, in order for us to have clutter in our space, and once we recognize it, a really great way on minimizing the amount of clutter that we have is by not bringing in extra items to our home. However, I believe that it is a complete myth to think that we're never going to have clutter. Even myself, as a interior designer, feng shui practitioner, we have clutter in our home 100%. And it changes and it shifts because as we ourselves evolve, as our activities and our projects and our priorities shift, so too does the items that we have, or the importance of the items that we have in our home. So I think the primary, or one of the ways we can really, use this in a practical example is, I have 3 young children myself, ages 9, 7, and 5. And as they get older, the clothing that they have in their wardrobe no longer fits, or they're worn out. A lot of the leggings that we have for our daughters, they wear out, fade perhaps. It just, or gets stained, their favorite top, but then you don't want to really let it go, but the stain isn't, it's there for good. There's nothing that can be done to salvage this piece. There's a lot of different ways that clutter can surface, and this would be 3 rooms of our home. So it's a fairly large area when you look at it in that perspective. So it's a great opportunity to really look and bring our awareness and discernment to these areas, and really just have that time set aside, perhaps like I mentioned earlier, week to week, to start culling and purging what we deem to be clutter, or the clothing in this particular case in our children's closets that no longer fit. And a great way too to know if it's time to declutter or to purge these items is by looking at your storage and looking at the capacity that it has in your space as well. So if you find, for example, keeping with the same example of our children's wardrobes and their closets, if there's no space or no hangers left, or if there's no space in their drawers perhaps, that's a good time to use that as a signal that it is time to declutter this particular area. And then you can schedule it in and kind of make it a really beautiful ritual and a ceremony, really, of where you're going through these items and saying goodbye to them. And as simple as this may seem, it can also be really it could be heavy, absolutely, when we're going through our children's clothing, because especially when we have younger children as well, because we have so many memories associated with these items of clothing, especially if they're 1 to 2 years old. I found that it was a bit challenging when our youngest daughter, she's still aging, she's still our youngest, but when she was moving from the baby and toddler years, I found that to be a little bit challenging myself, because she was no longer a baby going through, these really big moments in our life. So it can be really fun. It can bring up a lot of emotion as well, and that's okay. That is totally okay. Now, I talked briefly about what clutter is. I've talked about the importance of using our discernment to identify clutter in our space, the importance of setting our intention for our space as well. I've talked about bringing our awareness to our space and observing it to begin to see a shift already occurring in our space. Talked about how clutter also represents opportunities and different potentials in our space as well. I want to talk a little bit about the mindset around clutter as well, because oftentimes clutter gets a bad rap. And I'm here to say that clutter does not need to be this heavy, negative aspect, a part of our home. It actually is a very positive sign, very positive signal in our space. I did also mention about how as we evolve, so too does our space, and the items that we need in our home is gonna change naturally. It's a very, it's a flow, and it's a cycle that we have in our space, and it's one to really honor and to appreciate and respect. So when clutter starts to come into your awareness, or once items in your space start to feel more like clutter and less like it's serving you in that time, you can take that as a really beautiful sign and signal that you yourself are growing, evolving, and shifting into next chapter perhaps, or a next transition in your life. And it's a really beautiful thing. It's a really beautiful thing. Awesome. And so clutter is not bad. Clutter can actually be really good and a really healthy sign in your home as well. It's sort of what you choose to do with it that makes all the difference. Now, clutter can also be seen as decisions that have been postponed, and absolutely it could be seen that way. However, again, when we bring our awareness and our attention to that in our space, then we can start to create and have some really clever creative solutions come in to the forefront of our minds to create a space that's going to flow and feel really, really good to you and be really helpful, with lots of opportunity and potential present too. I dare to say that clutter, again, can be really good. Of course, holding on to clutter is kind of a bit of a different story, but my perspective definitely is if we see it in our space, it's ready to go. And it's on its way out once it makes it to your awareness and into your attention. Now, how can we clear clutter for good? There's a few different ways, and I've talked little bits about that throughout the video already, but I have sort of 3 primary ways that we can clear clutter for good. Of course, one way is looking at the mindset of how clutter is not necessarily something that we need to clear for good. Clutter is going to accumulate naturally, and that's a really positive thing. So having that mindset shift and reframe is going to make the process a lot easier for clearing the clutter as you go along. Now, another way of clearing clutter for good is by setting a very strong intention for your space, the space that we are looking at in particular. It can definitely be your entire home. However, when we're looking at perhaps a closet, perhaps a piece of furniture like a dresser or a TV stand, perhaps it's your refrigerator, perhaps it's the cabinets in your kitchen. There's ways we can set a really strong intention so that not only does clutter get highlighted in these spaces, but when we choose to bring new items into, like new food into our refrigerator, for example, or, a new appliance into our kitchen cabinets, does it serve or does it align with the intention that we set for the space? If not, it doesn't need to come home. It doesn't need to enter into your space or into your life. So that is one way that we can start to clear and identify clutter and limit really the clutter that you experience in your spaces. And with that strong intention leads us into the next tip, which would be to have a space that is designed intentionally as well. So a space that is designed intentionally is going to really show you and give you the visual representation of how the space is going to serve you and the intentions that you have already set. When you have a space that has a really strong intention and a strong purpose, it's going to limit the clutter that's in your space, yes, but it's also going to give you much more guidance and practical suggestions to use the space optimally. How many times have I seen, I know I've seen it fairly often, I've also experienced it myself, where, for instance, when my husband and I purchased our home that we've now been in for 8.5 years and have sort of filled out with our family, but when we originally moved into our home, we had rooms to spare. There was a lot of potential and opportunity with these spaces that we've, again, sort of filled out and are continually kind of sorting through and shifting through as well. However, we had these extra spaces, and I've seen this happen in clients' homes as well, time and time again, where there's a spare bedroom, or bedrooms. And what ends up happening is that they end up becoming an extra storage space. And really, we don't need a whole lot of storage. When we have items stored away, it is much easier to not think of them, and there they sort of sit and they're not being used, and then it becomes clutter. But when we have these rooms and these spaces with a clear intention and purpose in mind, then the clutter, the boxes, the storage doesn't sit there, and it doesn't create that clutter. So for instance, for a very quick example, you have a spare bedroom and there's no intention for this space. What can often happen is it can accumulate, boxes from our online orders. I've heard of the notorious Amazon box bedroom, or closet. I've heard and seen these before. What ends up happening is that these items, these boxes in particular, just end up taking space that's not needed, not necessary. Instead, we can break down the boxes, put them in the recycling area of your home perhaps, or at the front door to take to the recycling bin the next morning, have it in and out. This then spare room could be used in all sorts of different ways. It can literally sit with nothing in it and be used as a meditation room. It could be used with, say, a mirror, and you could have your yoga mat and a little altar stand to have your little mindfulness space. You could have a bed in there and some nightstands and have that be for guests when they come to visit and stay. And we're thinking now of over the holidays as well, so there could be lots of opportunity for guests visiting. It could be an office space. Perhaps you work from home once in a while and don't have a designated office space. This could be the perfect spot to put up a nice desk. It could be just a simple desk perhaps. It could be, a beautiful chair, and have it sitting in the command position so that you have a space to go to when the opportunity shall arise to work from home. There's lots of different ways that we can use these extra spaces, these bonus spaces. When we look at the priorities in our life and the activities that are our primary in our life, and how that can be reflected in our home, and it creates lots of potential there. And lastly, I wanted to sort of talk briefly about, while we're decluttering, and what we can do to help ourselves during this process, because it can be a very strong practice. It can certainly be something that is looked at as something that can almost be like dreaded. However, we want to make it fun. We want to make it energizing, because we're shifting energy, we're changing up your space. We're looking and revisiting items perhaps we've had stored and tucked away for a little while. So it can bring up stories. It can bring up different ideas that we have and patterns in our mind as well of why this clutter or the storage has really accumulated and has sat for a while. So it's a really beautiful time to start looking at how we can approach this practice in a really positive, uplifting way. I talk always about really creating a vibe, creating an atmosphere that's conducive to clearing clutter. And there's ways we can do this. So we can certainly open the window to have some fresh air come in. It's really great for our own personal energy, so keeping us, elevated. Again, if we're opening boxes and sorting through stuff that's sat for a little while, there's going to be dust. From a very practical perspective, having the window open can be incredibly beneficial. I also suggest a Clear the Vibes room spray that I particularly make an offer locally and abroad. I can ship it as well. And included in here is an essential oil blend that is really great for uplifting your energy, maintaining balance, then also helping to clear the energy of the space as well. So it can be really great for your own personal energy, but even the energy that is shifting and being stirred up in your space as well. Really great to have on hand. If you have at home, say, lavender essential oil, it will be really great. Peppermint essential oil, if you have that diffusing, or if you have it on a roller and putting it on yourself, or even simply opening the essential oil bottle and taking a big deep inhale, can be really invigorating and really supportive as you move through this practice. I often recommend lighting a candle, including the fire element. Fire itself is great for transformation, can be really beneficial at kind of sparking that light of inspiration within ourselves as well. So that's a really great tangible and practical ways that you can create an environment that's going to support you as you shift your environment as well. Definitely play music. You can play binaural beats through YouTube. You can play your favorite music. I love all sorts of music, in particular when I'm cleaning, while I'm decluttering, when I'm looking for that extra boost in energy and motivation. I'm not gonna lie, I play EDM. I play something that has a really strong beat that I can play up loudly, that gets me moving and dancing. It makes it so much more enjoyable. But it also kind of puts you in that mind frame of movement. And that's really important to remember and to be mindful as well. And lastly, I want you to take breaks. This is not something that you need to dedicate an entire weekend or an entire week to. Go as far as you can in one day, set it aside, come back to it. Scheduling it in is a great way to have that accountability for yourself. If you have a calendar or an agenda journal, like a planner, looking for mine, that you use, this can be a really great way to sort of schedule it in.